everybody, and thank you to everybody for coming out to participate in, or to listen to some of the speakers here, and to participate in the discussion that will happen afterwards, and also to be here to view this film. That's really great. I also would like to offer my thanks to the Canadian Injured Workers Association for all their work in organizing this, and of course Donna, who's been tireless on all this stuff, and will, I suspect, continue to be tireless. And it's that kind of work which we need to take and multiply over many, many people, because the more injured workers who can come together and bring others with them and talk about these issues and demonstrate and pressure our politicians, the better. You know, when it comes to the rights of injured workers, each of us can engage in advocacy on a case-by-case basis. But the situation, in particular the situation in Alberta, is not going to change until there is sufficient political pressure to make this government change the rules and the legislation altogether. Because it doesn't matter if you have the best representative in the world, the cards are stacked against you right now in this province. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Rachel Notley, and I am an MLA with the NDP caucus, and we are in my riding right now. And one of the areas that is my focus is workers' compensation. And even before I was elected, I've been a long-standing advocate for workers on workers' compensation issues. And I'm very aware of the situation that we have in Alberta, which is one that I think can be really summed up in one word, and that is simply this: injustice. That's how I would describe the state of the law as it relates to workers in Alberta who are injured or killed on the job. Now, there are a lot of ways in which our system is broken. I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 of them, and then leave a bunch for some of the other folks here to talk about afterwards, and of course for many of you to talk about once we get into a discussion format. But I think one of the first things we have to look at is that, as many of you know, our workers' compensation system was established many years ago, I guess in Alberta, not quite 100 years ago, to essentially save employers from the cost of being sued for their negligence when their employees were hurt at work. And when that decision was made 100 years ago, there was what people referred to as the historic compromise. Workers gave up their right to sue their employers, with everyone in the legal system understanding clearly that employers control the workplace. And so if the workplace is a dangerous workplace, it is because the employers allowed it to be that way. And so on one hand, and for that reason, workers have the ability to sue. On the flip side, what employers gave up at the time was they promised to pay into a fund that would pay injured workers immediately upon their injury, that would ensure that they didn't suffer a loss of income, and that they didn't have to spend 6 months to 4 years in the courts rolling the dice on whether or not their lawsuit would be successful. Because at the time, even though only 1 in 4 workers were successful, if they were successful, it would cost employers a lot. But of course, there were 3 other workers who weren't successful, and they just simply went into financial ruin. And so the idea behind the workers' compensation system was that each party was getting something out of it. Since then, though, I would say that the system has devolved, and it is no longer a balanced partnership, a balanced negotiation where each party enjoys similar levels of benefits. What it's turned into instead is an incredibly cheap insurance system for employers. In Alberta, employers pay almost half the national average of what employers in every other province pay into the workers' compensation system. And that is because this government sees the workers' compensation system as a cheap way to cover the cost of doing business, which is hurt, injured, and dead workers. And if they can allow employers to carry on carrying on their business activity without it costing them too much, then the Alberta government and the Tories believe their job is done. And so that's what we've got here, is our employers pay much, much less into the system here in Alberta than they would in other jurisdictions. And of course, the corresponding outcome of that is that injured workers in Alberta receive much fewer benefits for many fewer conditions for a much shorter period of time. And so there is an incredible injustice. Now, this is made even worse in Alberta because we also have one of the worst legal aid systems in the country. And so I was talking with Donna about this before we came up here. And so injured workers in Alberta are particularly compromised because they can't get representation, they can't get advocates to push and to take their case and to push their case at the Workers' Compensation Board the way money workers would in other jurisdictions. In other provinces, there's either a better legal aid system so that lawyers will take workers' compensation cases, or the labor movement, quite frankly, is bigger and they do more workers' compensation cases. And that work pushes the WCB to at least follow its legislation. Here in Alberta, there are very few skilled, affordable advocates for injured workers. So we don't have a system of even keeping the WCB accountable to the crappy-ass legislation that we have in this province. And then if you add to that we have a bunch of Tories who've been in power for over 40 years writing that crappy-ass legislation, well, then we have a real problem for workers. How do we see that? Well, we see it in that in Alberta, occupational disease claims are much less likely to succeed. Repetitive strain injuries are much less likely to succeed. Stress and mental health claims are much less likely to succeed in Alberta. Claims that do succeed end much earlier. We have the lovely, what do they call it now, the earning loss supplement, where they give themselves the ability to make up a pretend job and tell a worker who's permanently disabled that they could go out and get this pretend job and earn almost as much as what they were earning before they were injured, and therefore they've suffered no income loss, and therefore they're not entitled to any ongoing compensation. And whereas in other jurisdictions, those workers would have the ability to challenge that with very skilled representation, that is much less the case in Alberta. And so what happens is workers are just told that they should be able to do these other jobs, and that's that. And it's a big fight. And so that's one of the problems, is the fact that we don't have pensions anymore, the fact that occupational diseases are not covered, and then of course we have the growing reliance on medical evidence, which is not actually medical evidence. What happens is you have doctors in Alberta, now this happens everywhere, but this goes back to my point about the legal aid. You have doctors in Alberta providing medical opinions about people they've never met, who they've never examined, on the basis of memos written by case managers who aren't doctors. And it's the kind of thing that were you to actually take that into a court of law, it would most likely, in most cases, be thrown out. But again, workers are not given access to the tools, in many cases, to challenge those kinds of opinions. And the WCB has created many more and more opportunities for these arbitrary, sort of, I would say, fictional medical opinions to carry the day about whether a case should be successful or not be successful. So there are so many ways in which the system drives me utterly crazy. I mean, as some of you may know, I spent a brief stint as a member of the Appeals Commission when I first came back here from BC, and I stepped down before a year had even expired because I just couldn't stomach legitimizing the system as a member of an appeal panel because of the practices that were on that appeal panel. I served as what was referred to as a worker, not a worker representative, but sort of I was appointed as someone with a worker's background. But I wasn't allowed to ever write a dissenting opinion. So why that is, I have no idea. Our decisions were perfectly appealable. I should have been allowed to write dissenting opinions, but I wasn't. And so it didn't take very long before I realized I simply could not continue and in that capacity and sign my name to decisions which I felt were in many, many cases unjust. So I think that will be all I say at this point, except to end with the way I started, which is simply this. Injured workers, people who suffer a disability as a result of an injury at work, people who are left behind as a result of a spouse or a parent being killed at work, your lives are not easy, and often they are in a form of crisis because you're struggling with a disability and you're struggling with a loss of income as well as the loss of a loved one in many cases. So it's not easy, but the best thing you can do is continue what I see starting here in terms of coming together and realizing that your greatest strength comes from your solidarity with one another and your willingness to do something that my mother always used to talk about, and I think she got it from a bishop, the notion of speaking truth to power. Don't ever back down from the advocacy that you want to do and the demonstrating that you want to do and the pressure tactics that you want to engage in, because you're not only helping yourselves, you're helping each other, and you're helping all those other injured workers who haven't joined your movement yet. And hopefully that will help ever so slightly deal with the injustices that you have to face in your personal lives. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming here, and look forward to hearing a bit of the discussion over the next little while. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave before everybody else does, and in the middle of the discussion, because I've been kind of double booked. But I do apologize for that. But I hope you enjoy the movie and that you find it inspiring and that you're able to find some good information from the other speakers tonight, as well as from each other. Thank you.